deHaven-Smith was one of the authors that was published in the Journal of the American Behavioral Scientists between 2006 and 2010 on this issue that's been developed called Scad, State Crimes Against Democracy. And I'd like to read a little bit of one of the articles he co-wrote entitled Preventing State Crimes Against Democracy. And it's a part titled Unacknowledged Corruption. I think it's important, and it's going to lead us into this theme of the hijack narrative and how we've gone along this road of the breakaway civilization, and what are some tools for navigating our post-truth world. The political system's vulnerability to the newest and gravest type of corruption, conspiracy in high office to undermine popular sovereignty, often by manipulating national circumstances or priorities, has yet to be widely recognized, much less targeted for corrective action. When suspicious incidents occur that alter the nation's objectives, disrupt presidential elections, provoke military actions, or otherwise affect the national agenda, Americans tend to accept the self-serving accounts of public officials. Seldom considering the possibility that such interests might have been initiated or facilitated by the officials themselves. The mass gullibility, which itself invites state crimes against democracy, SCAD for short, is likely to not likely to change until SCAD detection and prosecution are improved. Okay, so Lance deHaven-Smith coined the term SCAD for state crimes against democracy because he said the social sciences had a gap in this area where and he talks about the ludicrousness of the term conspiracy theory, because anything that turns out not to be true we call as conspiracy theory. So in this sense it's a circular type of argument. And anything that's true that's been proven in court, we say it's conspiracy. That's in the jurisprudence. So what they've found when they've analyzed state crimes against democracy is the foxes guarding the hen house. When there are crimes that are of a political nature, the investigations into these crimes are highly controlled, tightly framed, and totally reliant on institutions and organizations that stand to be embarrassed by such organizations, by such investigations, I mean. One of the ways that law has to investigate criminals and to judge criminals is through getting people to testify and to flip. But that can never happen when there are state crimes against democracy, because the higher you go, the more corruption is at place. So even if you can prove, for example, that the Bush administration caused September 11th, and that's a game changer, just like the Kennedy assassination. When you know the truth about that, it changes everything about how you see power and politics and where we are in our country today. September 11th even more so. It's not enough to be able to prove it. To the extent which it will be valorized by the public, it doesn't have anything to do with the truth claims. It has to do with the amount of power that accompanies the idea. So this is why I can unequivocally assert that we're in a post-truth age, because truth doesn't matter anymore. What matters is the image and the ability to sell ideas through their flashiness So most people, they're not going to listen. Tune in, tune out. But to the extent to which you can, and I say this as a journalist who is definitely outside the mainstream, to the extent that we can present our ideas in a way that is attention-grabbing, even shocking, they'll be listened to. And truth is contagious. But in order for something to be contagious, first it has to reach enough people where it's in the position of being able to be spread. Now, when we're talking about hijacked narratives, we're talking about narratives that have the ability to shake up fundamental ideas about who we are in society and where we're situated with response to authority. Now, I'd like to read you a quote by Karl Rove. Karl Rove was the Bush administration's chief strategist. This was quoted in the New York Times. He said it to a group of journalists. People like you, journalists and intellectuals, believe that solutions emerge from your judicious study of discernible reality. That's not the way the world really works anymore. We're an empire now. When we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too. And that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just to study what we do. Now, I was listening to a reporter recently talk about how, in his words, the 9/11 Truth Movement and Alex Jones, they overplayed their card with respect to pointing out the passages in the Project for the New American Century, which the Bush administration wrote a year before coming into power, where they called for terrorist attacks on the American people, and when they called for a new Pearl Harbor in order to achieve their goals. And he said that just because they said they wanted terrorist attacks to happen doesn't mean that they carried it out. And it reminds me, a similar line of reasoning was, I was talking with an ex-defense guy here in Ecuador. You meet a lot of them, and he said, there's no evidence that the United States government is controlling the weather, but China is, and they need to stop. And I mentioned about the 1995 document, Owning the Weather by 2025, which was put out by the United States Air Force, where they said they wanted to be owners of the climate by 2025. And they spell out how they're going to do it with the fake clouds and tapping into the ionosphere. He said, yeah, but just because they say they want to own the weather doesn't mean that they're actually doing it. And this is a problem when people are arguing with something they've never looked into, and they have this shoot from the hip, knee-jerk reaction, score quick points, and they assume that a culminative argument is a conspiracy theory, because with a culminative argument, all you can do is just start stacking the pieces on top of each other. And I would argue that one of the reasons why we're in such a mess as we are in terms of the relativization, the relativizing of all these conflicting narratives, is because we don't apply the rigorous standards of jurisprudence to journalism and to historical events. Jurisprudence isn't perfect, but it can guide us. So in a court, judges will look for circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence gets a bad rap, but it's actually very strong evidence, and lawyers and judges will look for it. So if somebody says, and they're heard saying that they want to see their neighbor dead, they hope that he wakes up dead one morning. Okay, that's not enough in itself to say that they did it. But if they're They're also seen coming out of their neighbor's house before he died with guns blazing. Then that initial statement that they want to see their neighbor dead, while it wouldn't be important if that was the only evidence, it gains new importance in light of the other evidence. So in court, there's an interaction between the evidence and things that by themselves would be insignificant gain significance in light of other evidence that's presented. Exactly the same way when we talk about the hijacked narratives of geoengineering or false flag terrorism. The problem is a lot of the times when you're talking with people, they have no patience, and I sense there's a subtle and implicit assumption that if there was the kind of conclusive evidence for these things that I'm saying, they would have heard about it by now. In fact, many people have told me this over the years. I would have conversations with people on the right in the United States, and they would say, look, the Democrats have been looking for years for anything that could discredit the Bush administration. So if there was a shred of truth to what you're saying about them causing 9/11, they would not stop talking about it. But they're not talking about it, so that means you're on a soapbox. Yeah, they don't understand how controlled opposition works. But moreover, when we talk about pseudo events, we're talking about the hijacked narrative.